Now, a key point, and we're going to do static mobility. Now, for me, what I've got to point out to you here is where you want to put this and where you want to position this into your training. Because yes, it has some positive effects for us. And these positive effects being things like improving our range of movement and improving our body's resistance to force as we get into elongated positions. But the negatives of static mobility are that you can get what we call an acute reduction in muscle power. So basically, if you were to throw in loads of static stretching before competition or before training, you can basically dampen your muscle power down. So it's going to have a negative impact on your performance in that immediate session. And I've seen plenty of people who spend ages and ages stretching things out before they're going to go out for a session, and then go out for the session and just go and come back and be like, you know what, I felt flat as a pancake on that session. And often that's because you've got this acute reduction in power. So where I would say positioning static mobility into your routines is outside of training or post-training. If you put it in on recovery days or even in the morning way before an evening session, it means that we can hopefully get the benefits of improving range of movement while reducing these sort of negative consequences of reduced power. So I'm going to take you through that, and then we're going to follow it up with some stability stuff. So stability for me, again, we can try and stabilize loads of different joints. And I guess we'd be here for a long period of time if I started showing you how to stabilize every single joint in the body. So for this session specifically, we're going to look around some tips at the hip. So everything is a very hip dominant day today, stretching and stability. I want you guys to get involved. So hopefully you found your TheraBands while I've been jibber jabbering and your little kettlebells, so you can join me on these. Take away what works for you or what you think is useful. That's what I kind of want from this session. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen so you can all hopefully make me nice and big on your screen, except that sometimes, you might not like specific exercises, specific mobility things. That's fine. But I really want you to get involved and follow on with me now. So find yourself some space in your room. And what we're going to start with is some mobility exercises around our hips. Now, I'm a big fan of simple things done well. I think we overcomplicate trying to put in fancy exercises a lot. But one thing I do notice is that most of us don't do the simple stretches and simple mobility stuff well as this subtle technique errors. So I'm going to take you through some of them. Now, the first thing I want to sort of talk through you with is about pelvis positioning, because pelvis position for me is really key in terms of how we stretch different muscles. And when we're talking about pelvis position, we talk about two things. We talk about anterior tilt, which is where our pelvis sort of tilts forward, which is almost in that sort of fashion. And then we talk about posterior tilt, which is where the pelvis moves backwards. So it's where we sort of tuck our bum over, we contract our abs, and we tuck our bum in. It's almost akin to what we'd say, like if you imagine you had a bucket full of water. When you anterior tilt your bucket full of water, you're trying to tip that water out of the front. So imagine your pelvis is that bucket. If I say anterior tilt, you're going to tip that water out the front. And if I say posterior tilt, you're going to tip the water out of the back. So those are two key things that are going to be required in terms of how we position you on these mobility type exercises. Now, the first one for me is getting your hips open and your adductors open. So I start in a 4-point kneeling position. So I want you all to get into that 4-point kneeling position. That's what we're looking like from the front. And when we do this, I actually want your knees slightly further apart than your shoulders. And I want your legs nicely, perfectly in line. So you can see how there's a big straight line behind the back of me. You can't really see my foot because I've kept it straight. It's not in there, so you can see it, and it's not out there. It's perfectly straight. So you're going to get into that position, that 4-point kneeling, knees slightly wider than shoulder width, and feet perfectly straight, or legs perfectly straight. And then I want you to anterior tilt your pelvis. So you're going to tilt that bum as if it's going up towards the ceiling. Now, in doing that, what you're doing is taking up all of the slack in the tissues so we can hopefully start loading into a stretched position. So you're going to hold that anterior tilt and you're going to start to drop your bum backwards. So you're almost trying to start to sit back towards those heels. What I don't want you to do is all of a sudden just like tuck under so you can sit down like that. You've got to keep that pelvis stuck up, nice and straight, hands flat, and start to, and feet, knees wider than shoulder width, and start to take that bum backwards. Focus on, as you come further back, you're going to want to bend. So keep that tilt, keep tilting it up, and really start to move back into it. Once you're in that position, I want you to hold that position. As you hold it, you're going to start to now walk out your hands, keeping that tilt so they're out nicely in front of you. And then you can drop your chest and head down to the floor, slowly reaching out them hands while still keeping that tilt up to the ceiling. Now, as you get into this position now, what you should get, or I particularly do, which is probably one of my areas that I need to improve on, is a nice pull in through the adductors. And you're just going to hold that position. Remember, keeping bum going down and back to the heels, keeping that anterior tilt so your tailbone stuck to the ceiling, reaching them arms out and dropping that head down. You should really get that in through the front. So that's a nice starting one for me when I try to open out hips. The next ones are a quick move into lunge variations. So I love a good lunge variation, but I think because we can use them for so many different things, like hitting our hip flexors and hitting the front of the leg, the hamstrings. But what we all do often is we do these completely wrong. So when we hit our hip flexors, we all just go straight into this, which now makes it look like I've got a really flexible hip, really mobile hip. But actually, I've just done it lazy and I've sort of cheated to get myself into these positions. So I'll start you with the hip flexors and I'll talk you through how we can go into this position. You'll all find you can get into this position really nicely. So now I want you to come all the way back off it. So front leg out, come right back off so you're almost sat back a little bit. Now in this position, you're going to tuck your bum under. So this time we're going to posterior tilt. So we had anterior tilt before, sticking the bum out. We're going to tuck that bum under this time. Keep that glute nice and tight and that bum tucked under. That's got to stay in that position and then start to take your whole body forward, keeping that tuck under. Don't let it go, because if you let it drop into the opposite direction, you're going to get loads of range but no real stretch. So tuck the bum under, lunge yourself slowly forward. So for me now, this is the point where everything is pulling down that front for me. So that's where I'm getting everything in this hip. To make this even better, I like to then take your arms, and you're not going to see my arms, they're going to disappear into the ether, into the internet, or actually into the top of my room. So keep that position and reach your arms up nice and straight. What I'm trying to do is get my palms flat on the ceiling, just like that. So try and reach your palms flat on the ceiling, keep that tucked under, that lunge forward. And what you're doing is now taking up some of the tissue slack in the abdominals. This should really start to wind up everything through the front of that leg now. And you can hold that position. That for me is how we wind up the tissues here at the front. So we actually get a proper hip flexor stretch and an abdominal fascia stretch. Now, there's a couple of little ways I also like to adjust this position. Is come back into that start, but this time you're going to take your knee out a little bit and your foot in. So you should be able to see me a little bit like that. I'm trying to keep my pelvis nice and square on still. And I'm keeping my bum sort of tucked under, and I'm going to drop forward again. So this time I'm going to get a little bit of my adductors, what we call the adductor longus in particular, as I drop into that position. Again, arms up to the ceiling, reach to get a bit more stretch now through abdominals and through adductor. And then if we really want to wind it up a little bit further, you can drop the arm that's on the same side as the leg down, and we can rotate out to that opposite side. So rotating to the opposite side of my back leg should really increase the length or the stretch that you feel through those adductors. So that's how I'd go with them. So if you're thinking that those adductors are going to be really key for you to abduct that leg, take it out into that position so you can hopefully sort of clear that barrier. If you don't have that length, you're not going to get that leg out as far for one. So you can ultimately see where you're going to end up going, which is going to have to go upwards. Now, second variation on our lunge work is how we can really target this sort of front leg. So we tucked under to get the front of our body. This time you're going to come back into your original lunge position. Take that foot out nice and far in front of you, just about there. Now this time, while we're here, you're going to do the opposite. So you're going to anterior tuck the pelvis, tip the water out the front, stick the bum out behind you. The moment you do that, some of you might already start to feel the tension engage in the hamstring. And if you relax off, you'll feel it loosen off. So tilt that bum out, get that tension in the back of the hamstring. And this time you're going to keep that tilt, and we're going to go to sit backwards. So we move it in that direction. And the moment I take it even just subtly backwards, I feel this tension build right through the back of my hamstring. But one position we can go to there, really to sort of start to wind up that tissue area. You can come off, and we can add a bit of a neural glide to this as well. For those of us who feel like we get sort of neurally tight sometimes, you might have heard physios say that. You're going to pull your toes up, tilt that bum back, and again, glide backwards, but this time as you glide it backwards, the knees gliding down as well with it. And you should feel that stretch move completely different. Once you've got it, you can hold, and you can add some nice dynamic ankle movements to it. Keep in here set, keep that bum stuck out, don't let it tuck under. Dynamic ankle movements should really start to wind up that nerve tension through the posterior aspects of my leg. And hopefully what you're sort of getting at the same time is that position is remarkably similar to what you're going to have to adopt clearing those barriers. That's another really nice one for me around the hip that I like to use. Now, coming from them, tilt that up to you. Better. Coming from them, staying in that same lunge position. This time, we're going to try and get a bit of the glute and a bit of the hip with it as well. So what I'm going to ask you to do is take this arm on the opposite side to lead leg. It's coming across your body and down. So your elbow is just behind that knee. Once you're in that position, you're going to take this top arm and watch it as you go and try and reach to the back and the other end of the room, watching that palm of your hand as you go. So I've got this elbow resting on the arm, it's pushing the leg in a little bit, and this arm rotating out that way to focus on that hand. And that should give you a nice stretch through into that glute, through my lower back, into my glute, down my hamstring. You're going to hold that position. Now, the final one that I like for mobility around the hip is trying to add in a bit of like our obliques and a bit of our lat muscles in terms of getting these mobile as well. Because if you can keep these mobile, you can move that pelvis a lot more efficient. So come into sitting position, nicely cross-legged. What you're going to do is you're going to pop your head onto your knee. You're going to hook one knee, pop your head onto that knee. Take the top hand and follow it with your eyes, and you're going to effectively reach that hand up and over, trying to draw a really big circle around, then back up and over. So try to take it as far back as you can, watch it as you go, and rotate round and over. That should really get a nice pull through this side of your body, through your lat, through your obliques. Repeat them sort of pulls. Keep that head down. You take your head off the knee, you'll lose the stretch. Keep it down. And then you can try again on the opposite side, see which one's more restricted. Definitely this side for me. And reach over as we go. So for me, they're like nice little mobility things that I like to use around the hip and utilizing your pelvis position. One more that you all like to use, or most people like to use, is actually the pigeon pose, which is effectively where we have that leg across us and we drop into that sort of forward position. Again, it's very common, but commonly done wrong as well. So if you use a pigeon pose, it's reaching that front leg out, comes across your body, and you're trying to keep both femurs perfectly straight forward. So straight forward, 90 degree at my knee. But what you really need to do is when you're in that position, tilt that bum up to the ceiling. So if I'm to do it, you can see how restricted my hips are. The moment I tilt my bum up to the ceiling, I can no longer get my knee down. And this is about as much of a stretch I get in that back of that hip. That's pulling, and the back of my hip won't let me go anymore because I've wound up the rest of my body by trying to tilt that pelvis up. Often what we all do is just let it tuck under, let loads of compensations happen everywhere else, and we can get ourselves into a nice stretch position. But really, if you do it properly, tilt that bum up, drop that leg down, and it automatically takes away how far you can get and isolates the stretch to the specific points. So, whistle stop tour, just some stretch tips for you. Hopefully, some of you are finding areas that are like working segments that you feel particularly restricted with. If so, bank them, take them away with you that you can use, again, not immediately before running, but in the mornings or post sessions or on recovery days, these would be great.